And welcome back to another episode of JP and the Beanstalk.
You bet. There's a great energy in the gym.
Besides the fact that this is take 5. And either way. Yes. Fantastic energy. I'm feeling great.
Absolutely. It's fantastic.
We've had long weekends.
You know what? They've been long weekends. They've been productive weekends. This is part of the beautiful privilege of being a homeowner.
We work hard. We play hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would prefer to play hard over working hard.
True. That's always preferable. I think, we work hard so that we can play hard, right?
You think.
That's at least that's the goal.
That's fair.
Yep. You crafted a new basement floor.
Yes, I did.
A new shower. I mean, these are great things.
And you cut a tree.
Cut down a sequoia. So, a slight exaggeration.
Just one tree?
Just the one sequoia.
Yeah, just one giant redwood tree.
Exactly.
Because we live in California.
It's true. Don't ask questions. Just go with it.
We live in the worst state in America. I mean, anyways, continue.
Hey, you know what's great is it's just a blessing to have so much quality help, quality assistance, right? I didn't have to cut down the tree on my own. Far from it. Had all kinds of assistance. Greatly appreciated. So cheers to all those. My guy Dan, most prominently.
Yes, and I have a Tanner and a Josh.
There you go.
So yes, good help is hard to find, and yet we found them. So and now
we love them,
and now we run them until they break.
Something to that extent. It's true.
It's very true.
It's true. Well, Beans, it's great to be here. I'm excited to cover our topics today. We continue to live in this bit of a, frankly, entertainment desert, right? Especially relative to the previous years, as we've acknowledged. But we are doing yeoman's work at uncovering glorious topics, which to cover. Not the least of which is the conclusion of the Blade Trilogy, with Blade not 3, but Blade Trinity, which means 3. So they worked harder, I guess, on the naming rights. That's fun. So we'll get into that today. Of course, we will also discuss on a little bit of a broader, call it a 10,000-foot view topic of, hey, let's talk before streaming and after streaming. What does the entertainment world look like? We're going to get into some exciting. It's going to be data. We're going to get into some numbers. It's going to be a glorious conversation. Then, of course, another classic JP and the Beans top 5.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So all good things. Now, typically, this is the part of the show where I ask you a question. Frankly, I don't have a question for you today. I'm too pooped from cutting down a tree, so I think we just need to get into it.
I think so. I think that's fair.
That's great.
We've worked long and hard, and to be honest with you, this is my relaxation right now.
Right.
I have not had it.
Yeah.
All weekend.
Yeah, this is the time to get the reprieve.
Yes.
There is no doubt.
So let's just do it.
Let's do it. All right, so without further ado, Blade Trinity. A little bit of the background deets, okay? So it was released in 2004 for those dozens of fans of the show. You will recall that Blade 2 was released in 2002. So a mere 2 years from one film to the next, we get Blade Trinity. Now, this flick was directed by David Goyer, our guy, who also has the primary writing credit on Blade Trinity. I also found this quite interesting. David Goyer was assisted or given a co-writer credit, or gave a co-writer credit to Marv Wolfman. Mr. Wolfman, for those of you in the know or not yet in the know, is the creator of Nightwing in DC Comics.
And also one half of the Sticky Bandits.
See what you did there. Freaking Marv. Good one. You're thinking on your feet. Impressive work by you.
I'm so good at it.
Yep.
Anyway,
Marv is a comics legend of sorts, but that is one of his great claims to fame, is co-creating, and I forget who he co-created with, a lot of co-creations in Marv's world, but Nightwing. So bringing Dick Grayson back into the fold as his own hero, which I think we could just say, thank you, Marv. Well done. We appreciate you. Okay. Returners of the cast. Wesley Snipes, of course, is back as Blade. Has to be, right? If it's going to be a Blade movie.
Yes.
Chris Christopherson is in again as Whistler. Briefly, we'll get into that. New to the crew, Ryan freaking Reynolds is in, you guys, as Hannibal King. Good to see you, Rye Guy.
Yes.
Yeah, he's also ridiculously shredded. Outrageous. I think there's like a If there's a negative body fat, he has it.
And it's honestly, it was weird to see him with a beard.
Ooh, true.
Never seen him really with a beard.
Yeah.
It might have added to the douchiness.
Yes.
He looks kind of douchey with the beard.
Yep.
So it might work in that regard.
It was a good fit for his character, not a good fit for him as a person.
Right.
Definitely.
Right. We love Ryan clean shaven.
Yep, indeed. Jessica Biel shows up as Abigail Whistler, so the daughter of Whistler, who apparently that was his last name all along. Okay. Triple H. What a guy. Freaking professional wrestler getting his time.
Credited, though, as his real name, not Triple H. He's credited as Paul Levesque.
Stick with Triple H, Paul. It's better for you.
I will say, Levesque is a sweet last name.
It's not bad. Paul's just too basic.
Paul is...
But you need to...
He doesn't look like a Paul.
No, he doesn't look like a Paul at all. That's hard to hear, quite frankly.
He looks more like a Hunter, because that's what he goes by in...
Okay.
That's where he gets the part of the Triple H, because his name is like Hunter, and then I want to say it's like Helmsley. It's his wrestling name.
Yeah.
AKA Triple H.
I can understand why he went away from Paul. It's not good for him. But he's in there as Grimwood, great vampire name. Parker Posey shows up as Danica, a.k.a. a real vampire. Like, if there's a person that I encountered that I thought you could be a vampire, Parker Posey fits that bill. She just got the face for it.
Oh, yeah.
She looks like a vampire.
Yeah.
In real life.
Mm-hmm. I see that.
That's my theory. Patton Oswalt shows up as we're just going to call him the new Whistler. That's Patton's role. R.I.P. Also, and without further ado, Dominic Purcell as Drake, a.k.a. Dracula. I don't love the branding with the Drake, but my guy, Dominic Purcell from Prison Break, what a beast.
Yeah.
He's a great fit for the
We'll get into the whole Drake Dracula thing.
Yep, we'll get into that. So there's your rundown of the cast and crew. Riles, per usual, this is your first time.
Yes.
With Blade Trinity. My not first time. Riles, what did you think?
I told you, I think my order for Blade movies, I think in last place is Blade Trinity.
Yeah.
And then it's Blade 1, and then it's Blade 2. I think Blade 2 is really hard to beat.
It is.
Personally.
It's strong.
Blade 3, it was nice to see him actually get like a team outside of Whistler. I felt like that was a little bit more realistic.
Sure.
That he would need help with all of these vampires and killing them. Like Whistler, an old man in his 80s, was just not going to be helpful for too much longer, especially because he still had the limp in this.
Yeah, you would have thought that would have been healed, but no.
It must be a permanent thing.
That's nice, isn't it?
Yes.
Permanent.
So that was interesting. The weapons, of course, always dope. The bow and arrow that Jessica Biel gets in this.
Pretty sweet. Yeah.
It was badass.
Yeah. Pretty fantastic.
She's like, oh, yeah, I can use this around corners. And you're like, no, you can't. And then she just... And you're like, okay, I guess you can.
Actually, you can.
Science, I guess.
Prove me wrong. You got it.
So, no, but I think the team was good. I would have liked to see more of them all together. But at the same time, it just... I don't know. I don't know if it took away from Blade too much, or I don't know where the miss was here for me personally. But...
Yeah, I think I totally agree with your broad assessment of the trilogy as a whole in terms of strongest to weakest, right? This is easily the weakest of the three films. And I think the action is still solid, right?
Right.
You still get to see Wesley Snipes do his thing. Obviously, as you pointed out, the supporting cast gets some sweet action scenes as well. I think it's just the most basic out of all three of the films in terms of its plot. Like, what is the plot? Okay, so it's a vampire movie, so we need to have Dracula. Hey, let's have Blade and Dracula fight. And it's just kind of spending time until we get to that point where Blade and Dracula can fight. There's just not a lot in the way of character development that goes on in this movie. And you had that in the original Blade movie. In Blade 2, there was legitimate progress that Blade was making as a character, and even the supporting cast around him had some worthwhile character threads. Not so much here.
Yeah. In this one, the most character growth we get is from Jessica Biel's character. Like, Blade is established at this point. He's
He doesn't
himself.
change.
He's not going to change. He
good.
doesn't need to change.
Yeah.
And then Ryan's character was already this kind of the same way. Like he already went through all the character progress, and you're just like, oh, this is where he's at now. So, which by the way, great backstory for him to be like a former vampire that was turned and then came back and was cured and is like, I'm gonna kill all of them. That's dope,
right?
So, but outside of that, it was like,
yeah,
and that maybe that's where it is for that. But
yeah, well, I thought it was fascinating when I was doing a little research on the movie. The production history of this film isn't very strong, and what I mean by that is apparently Wesley Snipes just went full douchebag during the making of this movie.
Oh man,
right? Super disappointing to hear. It's but for example, he at times would refuse to communicate directly with his co-stars or with other members of the production crew. And at this point, he was a producer in the movie. So he kind of had, get out of jail, free to do whatever I want nonsense. But he would legitimately just have his assistants go and pass messages on either verbally or literally through notes.
He's douchey.
Just terrible. Just terrible. So he was evidently just an absolute turd to work with, which is too bad.
Yeah, it is
right?
bad.
And I do think it impacts the finished product, right? When you go, how did we regress here? How did we go from having some well-developed characters and some decent storylines to this just feels pretty formulaic at this point. So
it kind of tracks though, because if you think about the movie, he doesn't actually physically spend a lot of time with his co-stars.
True.
It's like he almost was like the lone wolf in real life as well as this movie. And don't get me wrong, that goes with Blade's character to an extent, where the first two movies, there's a reason it's just him and Whistler, because he's like, I don't trust anyone else really, and so I'm just gonna do it myself. So, but yeah, it was also, it was a little odd that they just threw in that Whistler had a daughter with another kid. Or with another daughter with another woman. Because it's like, wait, what? I thought the whole point was you were very hung up over your wife and kid dying.
Correct.
So was this like a rebound kind of thing?
Yeah, it's like, we need more intel here, bud. This is kind of the core of your character.
Never mentions her. And then it's like, oh yeah, hey, I got a bunch of other people that will help you. And it's like, by the way,
I've been training.
One of them is my daughter. Heads up.
There are some gaps in your story, sir.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like his death in this movie was cheapened.
Oh my gosh.
I think his death in the first one, 10 times better.
Correct.
Because it's
correct.
It's like a perfect ending for his character.
Right.
They brought him back.
Torn up by the vampires. Makes a lot of sense.
Kills himself because he doesn't want to become the thing that he hates the most.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense.
Yep.
But then to have that, and then he gets taken out by, he still gets taken out by the vampires, kind of, but it's the FBI.
It's the FBI. Right.
I will say, one of the best one-liners to go out on, when they're like, don't even move a finger, and he goes, how about one finger? And then just flips him off as he gets blown up. That's hilarious. That is phenomenal.
He goes out very on brand.
Oh, it's beautiful. That's probably one of his better, the better deaths out of him, but his first death was so much better.
Correct.
So that was a bummer to see. It was, it's still cool because they still show the influence of vampires throughout, the police, the FBI, all of that I thought was fascinating.
Right.
They should have leaned into the blood banks a little bit more with the blood farms.
Right.
Because that was horrifying.
Correct.
That whole premise was horrifying.
Correct.
And I don't feel like they really leaned into that part.
Yeah.
Which maybe don't get. That's not me saying I want to see more blood farms, but
but you're absolutely right. You're calling out a strength in the story that really gets neglected, and you spend so little time on it. You're left going, wait a minute, that should be leaned into more heavily, right?
Because that should be another driving force of, I need to kill these bastards before they.
Correct.
They're getting insane now.
Yeah, and the interweaving of vampires in how they manipulate, just call it like general society, right? Folks that aren't vampires. That's such a strong premise because think of how many worthwhile movies and shows, like I'm thinking of movies that are based in like the 1920s with police corruption, right? Or shoot, we just went through the Daredevil series, and Daredevil season 3 in particular plays really heavily into political and police corruption, right? With how Kingpin has gotten his hands in all those pots. Like that's a really compelling storyline when the alleged authority figure is not one that you can trust. Right. That's a really strong piece. And so that plays really well in this sense. And it's also a fascinating way to go, well, how are vampires even an issue, right? When you realize that, wait a minute, they've got all these powers, and a common person would go, well, I wish I had those powers. And so there's a mutual interest because the vampires are obviously limited because they can't operate in the daytime. So there is a mutual interest here that creates that opportunity for relationship. So it's not just as simple as humanity going, yeah, vampires, ew, gross, Blade, go kill them, sweet, thanks, bro. It's effective. Right. It really is.
Yeah, and I think another part of where this movie kind of missed a little bit is I feel like having your big bad be Dracula. Don't get me wrong, badass. He was great. When he was there, like the fact that he's the only vampire that can walk throughout the day outside of Blade, but he's like full vampire.
Right.
And that's badass.
That's pretty sweet.
That's terrifying.
Right.
That dude chucked a baby. By the way, how's that baby not dead? That baby, as soon as it was thrown, I was like, that's a dead baby. It doesn't matter. And either way, if it's alive, it's not going to do well when it's growing up. Okay? That was a whole thing. I was like, this doesn't make sense. I don't think Blade caught him perfectly.
Isn't good. The coochie.
Like, you might have saved his life, but he's not going to have a good, well life.
No.
So,
not good for the baby.
No, but I mean, even his ability to shapeshift is fascinating because you're like, oh, he could be anybody. Crazy. Like, and I mean, even like at that final fight between the two, and he's like, didn't he say something along the lines of you're going to give into the bloodlust at some point?
Yes.
Which is
super scary.
Right. That should drive Blade even further.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I did like him. It just, there was a disconnect between him and the other vampires.
Right.
Because in reality, he should have been helping them become what he is.
Yes.
Instead of just like...
Well, instead of like, he ends up being a villain of sorts where he says, no, just everybody has to die, right? He's against the vampires and he's against the humans. It's like, that's... just harder to connect with that.
It was odd. It was an odd choice.
Yep.
Although it was really funny for that little girl to just be like, yeah, my friends are going to kill you. And she's like 5. Telling this dude that's lived forever.
Confidence.
Right. So that was what was like, because even his intro, like Dracula's intro.
Terrifying.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. He ate like 15 women. Like
super scary.
And
yeah.
By the way, and he had the jaw thing, which is an interesting callback.
Yep.
To Blade 2, because I'm like,
yep.
Why?
I didn't want to see that again.
No, I thought we were done. Because they did a fantastic job of making him like a monster. Like instead of him just being like the old school, like I have two fangs
teeth, long cape.
and the odd V hairline thing going on.
That.
Like it was, and when he's full vampire form, he looks like a demon.
Yes,
an absolute demon.
Yeah,
so.
the design was great. The design was absolutely solid.
Yeah, and like I said, it was an interesting way to defeat him, but I don't know.
I know that at this stage in movie making, like trilogies were the soup of the day, right? This is what you did. By the time you made the third movie, this was going to be it. But I really wish they wouldn't have killed him. Like, I really wish that neither Blade nor Dracula would have died, right? Like, That would have been freaking sweet. Why not, in a perfect world, why not have Dracula as an ongoing villain? Like, why not have him take over the vampire race, and now he and Blade are these just mortal enemies,
but
like a recurring Blade villain of sorts.
But we can go into that with the new Blade and what we expect,
Yes.
because I think that would be perfect to just have him in this. I'm going to compare it to Ninja Turtles and this like Shredder role, where they don't necessarily need to fight him right away in the first one, but it's like all roads lead to Dracula. You build him up for the third movie, or a Midnight Suns. He's a perfect villain for that,
right?
You know, because I think in the first movie the villain was fantastic. Honestly, the second villain was fantastic. They have great villains.
Both movies had great villains.
All three movies, I'd say the main villains,
were solid.
10 out of 10.
Yep.
Like, they were great. The first one is very, like, flooded in with Blade.
Yes.
Because he's the one who turned his mom and made him who he is.
Right.
Pretty big deal. The second one was just an absolute maniacal, crazy guy who just wanted to kill everybody because they made him into what he was.
Also effective.
So, and then Dracula's the big bad of all big bads.
Right.
But yeah, that's what I'm hoping for in the next one, is like that. And I hope what they do differently with the new Blade is I hope they keep the mom around.
Yeah.
I think that would be also interesting to have him go on this quest to not only kill vampires but save his mom.
Sure.
So.
Sure. No, I think that's great. And I like that kind of that pivot as far as, hey, what would we hope to see in, or what are we hoping to see in the new Blade movies? I think there's a lot, truly, for as imperfect as different aspects of this trilogy are, I think there's a lot of worthwhile aspects to take away from it. Like, the design and the tone was great. Listen, to make it R-rated, it's vampires. You can't do a PG-13.
No, and nor should you. This should be a bloodbath.
Yeah. And so that element was really strong. The sheer variety of weapons, like, he's like a Batman who's willing to kill, and he's hunting the vampires.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he has a freaking utility belt full of fun things.
Motorcycle, car.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. All the things. I think part of what will be critical is, and I think you hit this so well earlier in this conversation, but making sure that you give Blade worthwhile supporting characters, right?
And I think with him being in the MCU, he's going to get a chance to even go further with that. Because don't get me wrong, Hannibal, great character. I loved him. I will always love Ryan Reynolds.
Right.
He just felt
a little forced, right?
He wasn't even forced, because his intro was badass. Like, hey, the cavalry's here. And like the first thing the villain says is, Hannibal. And you're like, oh, okay, they have a history. That's fantastic. But like, there is no like bond. There's no like, it's not like Blade and him become friends at the end. They are like forced to work together because he's trying to help Blade, but Blade doesn't want him at all. Right? Like, Blade don't like him.
Yep.
So in this, I mean, they've already kind of set up the Black Knight being a part of it.
Right.
I think this is a crazy thing to say. I think Morbius would be interesting because it's another Blade scenario where he's a vampire, but at that point, he doesn't necessarily want to kill. Okay, don't get me wrong. I don't necessarily want Morbius, but I think that dynamic would be interesting.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Moon Knight, Punisher. Can you imagine the Punisher with Blade? John Bernthal rolling up with Marshala Ali.
It's glorious. I can just like imagine them tag teaming and Blade hooking the Punisher up with all these silver weapons.
You know how amazing it would be, and just to have John Bernthal like Punisher just team up. He should be a part of the Midnight Suns, to be honest with you, because they aren't afraid to kill. They're cool with killing, and like it would be monsters. Look, it would be like almost poetic for him to go after like zombies with The Walking Dead. It would be almost poetic because this time he wins. Right?
It's like, listen, Frank, we know you love killing things. We're just going to help you kill actual monsters.
You can't
We're
go
to
to
the right thing to kill.
Yeah, you can't go to prison for murder and
a monster that everybody
zombies and
needs
vampires
to have dead anyway.
Right.
This is perfect for you.
Right. That would be great.
Yep, just got to point Frank in the right direction.
So I think that's where Blade will really thrive now, is because it's going to be actual, like, supporting cast that are superheroes.
Yeah.
I mean, Elsa Bloodstone, I know they already set her up. She would be interesting. Options. Yeah. And I'm just excited about that.
Yeah, I think part of what happened here, too, is they, bringing it back to this original trilogy, I think they just ran out of story to tell, quite frankly. Because when you have, and again, I give this credit to you, when you have this character that is the sole focus of 2 movies, and you get to that 3rd movie, you need a supporting cast. Like, you need other characters that matter in the story. And it worked in Blade 2 because you had the other vampires that he was partnering with, which was a great, like, natural tension, right? Because who's going to betray who first?
And Whistler and Norman Reedus.
Yep.
Those two were, like, they worked together, but they also didn't like each other.
Exactly. And you had enough of Whistler in Blade 1. That's probably about enough of that partnership. But then by Blade, I'm not going to call it Trinity. That's just stupid. By Blade 3, you got to stick that landing. You got to give him more supporting characters that are worthwhile. And what's too bad is that I think it was well cast. Like, Ryan Reynolds could have been a great fit if you had allowed the 2 of those characters to just spend more time together.
Right?
Because it could have been a fantastic buddy cop dynamic. You've got classic good cop, classic bad cop, but they just never actually got to hang out and do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They kept their distance from each other, which was odd.
It
was an odd move because you need to force him with those people at that point. And he did, don't get me wrong, he did work with Jessica Biel's character for a little bit of it. Because
that was probably what worked most is him, Blade, being something of a mentor, mentor, father figure to her.
Which is a switch for him because he's always been the other way around. So to see him just...
That was the one legitimate piece of character progression that took place.
Him going through with that girl after she lost, like, she's holding the dead woman, Jessica Biel's character. He's just like, use it. Use it. Instead of, like, being like, oh, you're going to be fine. He's just
like, that happened. That sucks. Like, nope, let's use it.
Use the rage. Yes. And then she just has this montage of hitting arrow after arrow. But, like, that's what we needed. That's the transition Blade needed to make, is going from this lone wolf to being like, oh, I can also influence my own, like, rebel group, essentially, of killers, and, like...
And have a greater impact.
Right.
If you actually want to, if the mission is so sacred to you, if it matters that much for you to succeed in your mission, then you do. You need more than just yourself. You can't go lone wolf.
So, yeah, now that talking about it, I think the relationships were what fell flat in this.
It's just classic storytelling stuff, right? Like, you can have the visuals continue to look great, the action scenes continue to be solid, because it's not a bad movie, right? But absolutely, when juxtaposed with the first 2 films, it's just a step down in terms of overall quality.
And I mean, and if you think about the ending, like, it goes to that too. Like, he goes off into the sunset by himself. So he didn't learn anything after that. It's like he ignored the fact that he had 2 people helping him fight. Well, they didn't help him fight I mean, they did kind of, but they were holding off everybody else while he could. Right? He didn't come back and say, "Oh, thanks, by the way. Let's
keep this partner thing going.
You guys are actually useful." He's just gone. He's like, "Oh," and Blade rode off into the sunset. And maybe they're doing that knowing that they weren't getting a 4th movie. But at the same time, it's like...
No, it's not well done.
They even say at the end, he's like, "Oh, yeah." And then he went on to continue to kill more vampires. And it's like...
By himself?
So now he's off on his own. Bummer.
Yeah.
'Twas a bummer in that regard.
Yep. Totally agree. One quick question before we continue to move forward. How many times can Triple H get kicked through a wall?
He got his ass kicked.
He did.
Which is the exact...
He was just there to get destroyed.
Which is the exact opposite. Now, I can't remember if it happened. Did he pedigree anybody? Because that was a missed opportunity as well, if he didn't.
I thought he dropped Hannibal in that way.
I think so. I think there was one pedigree, right?
Yes, there was one.
Which,
there was
good.
One.
It needed to
Had
happen.
to happen.
For those of you who don't know WWE, pedigree is Triple H's finisher in wrestling. And it's fantastic finisher. But it was just crazy when he broke his arm and they like fixed it and Hannibal's like, well, shit. So, I mean, that fight was very entertaining, but he got his ass kicked.
He got wrecked constantly.
Also, was the arrow that he got shot in the face with not silver?
I guess it was the one.
That didn't make sense to... Did it?
No.
Because I'm like, you're a vampire hunter? Everything you have should be silver. Shit, the rope that you have, the string on your bow...
Correct.
...is a laser.
Correct.
And you couldn't get a silver
you
arrow? That's the one?
Arrow.
That's the one arrow
You shot
that
the biggest vampire
work?
without the silver arrow? You kick. How is this a dud, guys?
I don't understand that.
You use copper instead of silver. Who screwed this up? You spray painted
Plot
it and you
holes.
thought it'll work the same. Nope.
Oh, and then another terrifying, horrifying thing they did in this. The experimenting with the animals. The dogs. That was horrifying. The unhinged jaw. The obsession with the unhinged jaws on these vampires.
Yeah, it's
horrific.
Super gross, by the way. Super gross.
And also, after all the muscly dogs, they give Triple H the frickin' Pomeranian. I was like, are you serious? It's kind of funny, but why?
Yeah, it was both funny and stupid.
It was dumb.
It was really dumb.
And you had all the other ones be Rottweilers.
But Triple H gets the tiny little teacup pup.
Sure. 3 Rottweilers, 1 little ass Pomeranian.
That was just gross. Yeah, just disgusting. I felt bad for Patton Oswalt's character. Like, boy, what a tough way to go. Super dead. Super dead.
Everybody in that
Yes,
on that boat.
In that compound. Yep.
Also, I was like, I thought Ryan was going to die.
Yeah.
I was like, Ryan's dead.
Yep.
And then he shows up. I was like, they didn't kill him. But the fact, I think the greatest thing with Ryan Reynolds is he's consistently Ryan Reynolds.
Correct.
In everything he's in.
Ryan, listen, we're bringing you into this movie to be you.
Because that whole time he's chained up, he's just talking shit.
The Hello Kitty tattoo, that's just such a great line. Such a great line.
We're back.
Yep.
Yeah, crazy. Okay. Anyways.
But his Hello Kitty line about the Hello Kitty tattoo, incredible.
It was fantastic. But, and here's where there was a good part with like the vampires actually threatening it. And she's like, if you don't tell us what we need to know, I'm going to turn you back and I'm going to make you starve. And I'm going to put this little girl in here and that will be the first thing you eat. And you're like,
that's really effective.
I don't know why this is being a pain in my tuchus, but it's fine.
I know, but you're doing a great job.
I'm keeping an eye on it.
Yep.
So I apologize in advance for this is jumpy.
Hey, all good things. Anything else you want to hit on with Blade 3 and the future Blade movie?
I am honestly, I'm very excited. I think Mahershala Ali, and we've said this before, I think he's a great pick for the next Blade.
Correct.
The way, and I know it's discouraging to have this movie get delayed, but it should be actually encouraging because they want to make sure that this film is fantastic.
No question. Yeah, bottom line, take the time that you need in order to make it as well as you possibly can. Like, there's no perfect movie out there. There's no perfect piece of art, but there's no reason to rush whatever it is that you're creating just for the sake of, I just got to get it done. Right. So take the time that you
Absolutely.
need. No question. That is a glorious segue into our next topic.
Now, real quick.
Yes.
Do we want to mention the fact? Just take 1 second.
Yeah, do it.
Deadpool Wolverine, new trailer coming out. Did you see the new poster?
I missed this.
It's not out yet. It comes out tomorrow. So next pod, we will have a new Deadpool Wolverine trailer.
That's great.
They did release a new movie poster. I just want to point that out. That
good
real quick before we go into our next dive.
Yes.
I will show you. Oh yeah, you're gonna Google it.
I'll Google it right now.
Fantastic. It's kind of hilarious because it's just their hands, and it's Deadpool's one finger just grazing the Wolverine claws.
Gosh.
So, to me, I might get that if that comes out as an actual movie poster. So, it's so funny. So, yes, they're releasing a full trailer. So, for next podcast, we will have a full Deadpool Wolverine trailer to discuss. So, I'm super excited.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Great pull on your part.
Yes. So, before we deep dive, because I know this next topic is also going to be
we'll spend some time
another long topic. So,
another long one. Well, okay. So let me just first kind of set the context here for this topic. All right, before we get too far into what the heck the topic actually is. All right. So the basic premise is this: the wife and I watched Argyle, okay, an Apple TV Plus original feature film just a few days back, and it was the latest in a long line of just fine movies that she and I have watched just in the past several years, right? And as she and I were talking about it, because there were definitely some highlights, right? Like the cast is fantastic. It's so well cast. It's very entertaining in a lot of spots. And at the same time, there's just some mediocre CGI, which is just so bamboozling to me. Like, how does this keep happening? But there's some really simplistic storyline elements. The messaging of the movie is just very surface level, right? Like, there's nothing else to really grab onto. It's just there to entertain you, which is okay sometimes, but when it becomes the pattern over and over again, it just sticks out. And so, as she and I were having this discussion, it kind of played off of the conversation that we've had in bits and pieces, Riles, of, okay, how much has the overall volume of content impacted the quality of that content, right? And so we've had this conversation again, just anecdotally, but I wanted to actually take some time to get into some numbers, some freaking data, and go, okay, I think my hunch, my assumption is that there has been a increase in the overall amount that's being produced and that's being released. But is that actually true? And I think it's safe to say that is. That's nothing like intuitive on my part. But if it's true, okay, how much has it actually increased? Well, when you get into the numbers, it's actually kind of fascinating, okay? So let's just go to the tape here. Now, we'll try and limit this as much as possible to the last 10 years. But for this first bit of data, we're going to go really broad, all right? We're going to go into the last 20 years. So back in 2003, all right, the number of feature films that were released, 2003, 20 years ago, and this is going to be an approximation, so don't hold me to this right on the button, was about 239, okay? These are movies getting released in theaters, 239 movies. Great. Fast forward 10 years later, just 10 years later, 2013, that number has jumped from 239 to 819.
In 10 years?
In 10 years. Okay? That's wild. Another 10 years, 2023, our most recent year, 1,273. So,
and that's movies?
And that's movies, okay? Not shows.
So we went from 200 movies to 500 movies.
We went from 200 to 800.
Sorry, 200, 800, 1,000.
1,200.
1,200.
So we increased, like, in other words, if you want to really oversimplify it, in the span of 20 years, we are now at a point where there are 1,000 more movies being released than what we were accustomed to just 20 years ago.
That's insane.
That's wild.
That's insane to think about.
That's, right? It's almost incomprehensible, okay? And are all of these getting released in the theaters? No, not necessarily, right? That's one of the big changes that we're going to discuss here. Obviously, 20 years ago, this is pre-streaming services, so the only way you could see a movie was literally going to the movie theater. Clearly, a lot has changed since that time, all right? So that's a nice broad view. Let me throw a few more numbers at you. So that's movies, right? What about TV shows, okay? And again, we'll try and keep this to the last 10 years or so, all right? But back in 2013, okay, there were about 349 what we would call original scripted TV series being produced in the United States.
Does this include daytime television? Like,
let's assume that it does. Let's assume that it does. Okay.
I was curious. I just didn't know if those count.
And actually, I'm going to go back even one year more. All right. 2012, 288. Fast forward to 2022, again, a 10-year window, 599. So an increase
almost
of
400.
an increase of 300, over 300 additional TV shows. So just looking at those two metrics, again, the sheer volume has increased exponentially. Now, here's why this matters, okay? What the heck is the point? The point is the population of humanity, and of the United States in particular, where the bulk of these shows and movies are being released and they're marketed towards, we haven't had this kid boom, right? People aren't just popping out babies left and right.
Right.
The population continues to increase steadily, but where we have this exponential increase in content, we don't have the same exponential increase in eyeballs, in people to consume this content. So it also begs the question of, well, what happened? Why all of a sudden, seemingly, or all of a sudden over 20 or 10 years seems a little silly, but why has this increase taken place? Okay. This is where we get into the streaming services. All right. So if we do a little chronological timeline here, we're going to start with just this basic premise of here's where this content is coming from, right? You have Netflix, you've got Hulu, Amazon Prime, Paramount Plus, Apple TV Plus, Disney Plus, Peacock, all of these. Imagine them this way. Imagine them as TV studios, right? Because for the longest time, for decades, if not beyond, the way that a movie or TV show got produced was by a network on one of the two coasts, more often than not, right? Physical location saying, hey, we're going to put out this show, we're going to put out this movie. Well, all of a sudden, it's as if we got several new studios. And typically, that's the kind of thing that takes decades to cultivate. You have somebody that's cut their teeth at one of these older studios, and they go and they branch off, they make their own studio. But all of a sudden, we had Netflix, who made their money, made their bones through renting out movies to people. They launched their own streaming service in 2007, and that changes the whole paradigm of how we consume content. Right now, something to keep in mind with Netflix in 2007, they didn't have original content at the time. Their claim to fame was, if you want to watch it, instead of having to, let's say, have a cable subscription where you have AMC and you want to watch Breaking Bad or The Walking Dead, if you're willing to be a little more patient, you can just catch it all on Netflix, right? And then as Netflix makes that money, they realize, wait a minute, we can even cut out the middleman by just producing our own stuff. So instead of paying $300 million to Disney for the rights to show their content, they're just going to show it themselves. Okay? Now, that started in 2013. That's when Netflix released their first piece of original programming. That was House of Cards. All right? Since that time, Netflix has produced, so again, in 10 years, they have produced over 1,500 originals. Now, that's all encompassing. There's plenty of documentaries that fall into that category, okay? But that includes feature films, that includes TV shows. That is crazy. Netflix, by themselves, 1,500 originals in that span of 10 years. Now, Hulu also launched their own streaming service back in 2007, so there was kind of a side-by-side release of those two streaming services. Amazon Prime launched its streaming service in 2011, and then we had a little bit of a gap, right? So you have Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime living as kind of the holy triumvirate of streaming services. But then you start to see here in the last several years, other entities start to emerge. CBS does CBS All Access. It's now called Paramount Plus after they rebranded in 2021. But they released their streaming service in 2017. Apple TV started its own original content in 2019. And so now all of a sudden they've got their own streaming service. Disney Plus, also November of 2019. Peacock, July of 2020. Okay, so again, why does all this matter? It has created an absolute flood of content as all of these studios, both old and new, are battling for the same number of eyeballs to try and get to watch their content. So we've had this oversaturation of the market, And now the question is, so who's, ultimately who's going to win, right? Which of these studios are going to survive? Which of these are going to absorb the other? But I'm getting a little bit down a rabbit hole there. Here's a couple quotes I want to throw at you to, again, help shape the conversation. This is from our guy, Scott Stuber, who is the head of Netflix's film division. Okay. And this is Scott talking in the context of Netflix's recent history with putting out its own original content. Scott says, we were growing a new studio. We'd only been doing this for a few years, and we were up against 100-year-old companies, right? The older movie studios, TV studios. So you have to ask yourself, what's your business model? And for a while, it was just making sure that we had enough. We needed volume. Okay? So that's Scott on the Netflix side. On the Hulu side, this is from Craig Erwich. This is back in 2017. Okay? And Craig is was Hulu's head of content back in 2017. And Craig said, original programming is really the best way for us to define our brand. It's very important for us to be able to say only on Hulu, right? So, two big takeaways here. One is the motivation is they're trying to get our attention. That's why we're seeing so many more shows, because as soon as you finish with one show, you need to go watch the next content that's on Netflix or on Hulu or on Apple TV+. So they have to keep churning out an just insane volume in order to keep your attention. Otherwise, you're going to go to where the content is only on Hulu or only on Apple TV+, so on and so forth. And there's obviously a limit, right? Everybody can't subscribe to all these subscription services or streaming services. And you don't even have the time to watch all of this content, right? So where that leaves us today is a couple of things. First of all, this is obviously not sustainable. At some point, this sheer level of volume is going to throttle back because it is all about making money, and the amount of money that these respective, like it just feels like an arms race, that these respective streaming services and studios are just tossing at content. There's no way they're making the kind of money they want to right now. It's just a matter of they're trying to win the long game by risking a little bit more in the short term in the hopes that they can outlast the competition, right? But the other piece here is not only is this not sustainable, but I think part of what's really important for us as the consumers, we have to recognize by understanding the context of this, call it entertainment environment that we're in. Listen, we have an opportunity to influence the content that's going to come out in the future by giving our most valuable asset, which is our attention and our dollars, to what is actually worth a crap to watch, right? So, in other words, ignore the stuff that's not very good. You don't have to. Like with Marvel and the MCU, wait for them to come out with stuff that is actually worthwhile, that you allow someone else to watch and say, hey, you know what, friend? That was good. Go watch it. You don't have to try and keep up with it because it's not worth your time right now. That's our job. We're here for you.
Yay.
You're welcome. And
yay. We love it.
Yay. But truly, I think part of what's challenging from a consumer point of view is our brains haven't caught up yet to this new reality, right? Our brains are still stuck in 10 or even 20 years ago of, hey, new show, new movie comes out. Oh, I've got time to watch it. I'm going to go watch it. It's going to be great. And listen, when there's more time behind the production, and I'm not so naive to say that every movie that came out 20 years ago was great. No, obviously not the case. But in general, when you have more time to make something, it's going to be better than when you're rushed. You're going, we just got to push this thing out. We just got to get rid of it. Like I think I told you this the other day. I was rewatching one of the Transformers movies, and the CGI is phenomenal.
Right.
It looks so good. Now, there are plenty of gaps, and we've talked about this ad nauseum. Yes, we know the plot sucks, but you know what the plot is? It's actually awesome. It's robots battling robots. Freaking sweet.
If you need anything more out of a Transformers movie,
you.
Go watch something different.
It's not for you. Yeah.
It's the same with Godzilla Kong. If you're going in there to be like, man, I really want to know what Godzilla's thought is on the political climate, get out of here. No one cares.
No, you want to watch the big monkey fight the giant
lizard
that breathes fire, right? But my point is, those movies knew what they were and they looked good. It's driving me nuts how many movies I have watched in the last several years, Argyle being the most recent, where the CGI was just freaking cartoonish. It's like the technology hasn't gotten worse.
No.
In the last 10 years. You watch Lord of the Rings, those movies are gorgeous. And they used CGI appropriately and in a complementary way to the practical effects. But they're so much more limited 20 years ago than they are now. And yet we're putting out movies that look worse. It's
tough.
It's quite tough. So anyway, it was fascinating to dive into the numbers. And the other big takeaway that I had is I'm optimistic that for a number of reasons, I think we are at the beginning of that throttling back point. I think we're starting to see studios correct themselves with the sheer volume that they're putting out. And I think we're going to start seeing less, and hopefully, that means a return to the high caliber content that we got from the MCUs of the world as recently as, 5 or 6 years ago. Really wasn't that long ago that they were churning out absolute gems. It just feels like it's been a while because we've been fire hosed with so much content.
Now, did you say Argyle was like a streaming service movie?
It was an Apple TV Plus movie.
Okay.
So they released it in theaters and then, of course, released it on Apple TV.
Now here's a question for you that I just thought of.
Yes, go for it.
Do you think that it also has anything to do with the fact that Apple Plus, they're making a movie in mind with you are going to watch it in your living room?
Yep.
Where all these other movies like Transformers, they are designed to be watched in a theater.
Yep.
So the quality already, they're like, oh, we have to make sure that the quality is worthwhile. So when you're in the film, it feels like you're getting blown up along with Megatron.
Yeah.
Like, I think that has to have some sort of effect too, because they're like, oh, well, if we're just going straight to the streaming services, it's another prime example of this, is like the old straight to TV Disney movies. Okay, you had, if you're wondering, there is Aladdin 2, Aladdin 3. There's Lion King 2, Lion King 1.5, that's focused on just Timon and Pumbaa. There are 3 Lilo and Stitch movies, not just one. I watched the other 2, loved them. Anyways, that's besides the point. So
cherish them.
Those, they realized, were not movies for the theater. They weren't going to make that quality leap. Right? There's 3 Cinderella movies. We don't need 3 Cinderella movies.
Woof.
Guess what? Disney also knows that we don't need 3 Cinderella movies. So they're like, you know what? We're going to take 2 and 3. We're going to add a little bit. Like if you just watch the first one, you're going to be good.
Right.
But it's just for the Cinderella fans, the diehards that are like, I have a glass slipper hanging up in my house because Cinderella is my life. That's there for them.
Right.
And they realize this is not going to make money on a 2 or 3, so we're just going to go straight to film. So it's like one of those things
but
where
they're
I'm
making money on that, right? They know, hey, we can dial down the production cost and we can still return enough on the watching, on the rewatchings.
And to me, it's almost like that, where they're like,
it's a great comment.
Instead of Disney like making money off their already established characters and other films that don't matter, these streaming services are like, you know who people really like? Henry Cavill. Let's grab that guy.
Right.
And let's just throw him in a movie.
And here's the thing. He's hardly in the movie. Okay? The way it's marketed, you would think he is
the main star.
No.
Which is good because that haircut is tough.
It's tough and it's hilarious to look at.
Right.
But Cavill, John Cena, I forget her name. The individuals that are
Bryce Dallas Howard.
She's one of the primary characters. Sam Rockwell is one of the primary. They far and away have the majority of the screen time.
Okay.
But Cena and Cavill, very little. It's disappointing.
But I mean, I wonder if
I'm
that's
getting off topic. I apologize.
No, you're fine. But I'm wondering if that's just part of it too. Is we just need to realize, oh, these are not movies meant to like make us like fall in love with a franchise. It's more like, oh, here's a movie that we have an actor or actress that we know you love.
Yeah.
And we just happen to want to tell this,
It's marketability,
Yeah,
right? It's
right.
how can we get your attention? Hey, we can put this actor, we can put this actress in it, and it's going to catch your eye. Like The Gray Man with Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans. Great marketing. 2 actors that I enjoy watching, so I'm going to go watch it. I watched it. It was a Netflix original film like 2 or 3 years ago. It wasn't great. It was fine. It wasn't terrible, but it was just okay, that's all right, I guess.
Right.
And when I think of the movies in the last few years, like 3 or 4 years that I've watched that I have loved, that I thought had a lot of just outstanding qualities and value, I think of Top Gun Maverick. That was a movie that certainly took its time.
And
on a
made
production
for the
value.
theaters.
Yep.
And Tom Cruise,
Yep.
one of the main guys, was passionate about making sure that if
Yep.
we're going to do a sequel to Top Gun,
Right.
it needs to be the same level of the original, if not better.
Right. There is no doubt. But that one just sticks out so much in my mind. Dune Part 2. Listen, I know it wasn't either of our like cup of tea. We're not coming away going, one of the greatest movies I ever saw. But it's made really freaking well.
And that's not also
really well.
Also not made for the house.
Right.
That is made
right.
for a movie theater.
Right.
Like,
And it looks incredible. Like, it just looks incredible. There's not a single shot in that movie where you're going, ugh, they rushed that CGI. It looks phenomenal.
Right.
It looks like what every freaking movie that's using CGI in this day and age should look like. Should not have to go to the movie in this time and go, that looks like a cartoon.
But
there's no reason for that.
But if you think about it, just movie TV wise,
Yep.
the movies bomb more often than the TV shows.
Yes.
If you think of Netflix's successes, you're not going to be
of
throwing
TV
out
show
movies.
success.
You're going to be saying Stranger
Yes.
Things,
Yep.
Daredevil back in its prime,
Yep.
Ozark
now.
House of Cards,
Yep. House of
Ozark,
Cards.
stuff like that. You're
Yep.
not going to name a movie.
Right.
You're not. It's not going to happen.
And I think that's a pattern with these streaming services is where they've had successes, it has been in their TV shows.
And that's because they are built for the home.
Yes.
And maybe that's
No
what
question.
part of the translation
No
where
question.
that gets lost is that they're making movies for TV and not for movies for the movie theater. And maybe that would change the whole format if they're like, oh, we need to make this movie for the theater.
Right.
So that way when it comes
Right.
to our streaming services, this feels like a movie production and
It feels
not
like 100% of a movie,
Yes.
not like 80%.
Right.
Because, listen, I'm not trying to rag on it and that I watch it and I go, well, this is like watching the Fantastic Four movie from 1994.
Right.
Where it's campy and just sad and you're going, oh, this is hilarious.
This exists.
Right. Right. Or Howard the Duck. Like, I think you're absolutely crushing it. That perspective, that posture of people are just going to watch this at home. They're not going to watch it on the big screen where it's that much more revealing if something is off, right?
Mhm.
Because you're that much more, the microscope is that much more detailed. I think that's absolutely on the head.
And not saying that all movies in the movie theater are like great because
Correct.
there's
Plenty of stinkers.
There
out
are some movies you're like, how did this even get made?
Yep.
And then it makes you wonder what got canceled. Okay, there are movies.
If this survived,
Okay.
what didn't?
I will throw out, for example, Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly's movie Sherlock or Holmes and Watson.
Oh my
That was a
gosh.
movie that I was so excited for. Bombed. It was not a good movie. They should not have. The premise was there.
Sure.
The
Sure.
execution was not. Don't
Right.
know what happened with
Right.
that. Okay,
Right.
but there's some movies that are gonna. But at the same time,
that's always going to be true, right? So
Right.
we're not trying to get to a point of can we make perfect movies or the best movies always. There's always going to be some that are better than others. What's frustrating for me about this is it's just unnecessary. Like all this content, we can't watch it. Like it was almost better, I think. And I think here's the other element here that's an unintentional consequence of the sheer volume that's being churned out is when you have this much content, you have less opportunity for people to connect with each other over the shared experience of having watched the same content.
right.
Right? You just create less and less of that shared experience because someone's going to watch The Bear on Hulu. Someone else is going to watch The Ozark on Netflix. Someone else is going to watch The Handmaid's Tale. I just said Hulu again. I can't think of an Amazon Prime example, but you
The
get
Boys.
the point. There you go. The Boys. Someone else
Invincible.
gonna watch The Boys. You're just crushing it. But that's my point is you have less of that shared experience, and that is what was so – that is part of what made the MCU churn out these massive, not just great movies, but money-making successes is you had people coming to these movies because of shared experience. Because they had watched it, their friend had watched it, and it just snowballed in such a powerful way. And now it is a splintering impact where you have less and less of that even as an opportunity. It's harder. Like the odds are against you to have watched something that someone else watched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to even add to that, like, there is a very different experience going to watch Avengers for the first time.
Yep.
And that's the first movie experience that I remember where the first Avengers drops and the whole theater is going ballistic.
Yeah.
When they do the
legitimate
whole
cheering.
When you see the first rotation, everybody laughing when the Hulk slams Loki into the ground.
Right.
Right? Like that whole thing.
No question.
Everybody's on board. Same with Star Wars, Episode 7.
Right.
Infinity War was like that. And obviously I'm naming movies, but like that I'm familiar with. But when you're going to like even like a comedy movie, right?
Correct.
And everybody's laughing together, it adds a little bit more to it.
Yeah.
When instead you're just at home and you watch it and it's like it's still great, but like
it's a different experience.
Right. There's a difference between watching that movie on the airport or in the airplane on the TV because you're passing 2 hours compared to but like and my dad, I remember going to Iron Man and Spider-Man with him.
Correct.
There's a different experience with that.
I wouldn't be surprised at all because making a movie is so much more expensive typically than making a TV show. It's not always the case, but typically that's the case with a few exceptions. I would not be surprised at all if the trend that we see moving forward is that these, I'm going to call them auxiliary studios, the Apple TV Pluses, the Amazon Primes, so on and so forth, the Netflixes, if what they throttle back first is the movie production. If they go, you know what, this costs us the most, it makes us the least, it's better for us to pay the other studio after they've made the movie for the rights to show that movie on our streaming service than it is for us to go through the expense on our own dime that isn't really going to recoup us what we want. Let's instead put out the TV shows that people can have that shared experience with by watching it together, that they can get engaged with for a longer period of time. Because really, if you're a streaming service, that's what you want. You want that subscription. You know what's going to bring people back? It's not going to be the 2-hour movie that they watch and they're done with. It's going to be the TV show that has a new episode week after week after week, and then another season that's going to come out. So to me, that's just the most natural, organic correction that is going to take place. If I can look at my crystal ball, it's going to be they're going to maybe not entirely stop producing movies, but it's going to be one here, 2 there. It's going to be a very small amount.
I feel like if they want to get back on the right footing, they need to stop making movies altogether. They need to just focus on TV shows and then bring movies that were already shown.
Exactly.
And
that's the best way to do it. I totally agree.
They treat it as a rental because I think what they didn't realize, because if you think about this too, back when we were growing up, you would turn on CBS or you would turn on NBC to go tune in to the next episode of The Office. I don't remember a time where NBC was like, hey, guess what? We got our own original movie dropping next week, and you're going to love it. No, they're showing other movies because they know that, hey, we are a TV platform. We are a TV show. So we're going to give you a bunch of different episodes of TV shows that we're going to play, and there you go. So maybe that's just what Netflix and Hulu just need to go back to, is the fact that, hey, let's just let's just have these movies up for rental.
Yeah.
Right? And then have your occasional movie like your Cinderella 4s on Disney and just release it for the kids.
Yeah.
For the kids, not for me. I don't need to see it. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah. I don't think there's any question that we have shot past whatever the balance point is on the line. We're way beyond that. But I'm optimistic that we're going to come. I don't know that if we hit it, we're certainly not going to settle on it. Typically what happens is there's an overcorrection, right? But I do think that in the next few years, we're going to see a healthier trend. At least that's what I'm choosing to believe. I could be totally wrong, but because it's been, frankly, discouraging how what I can recall, right, for the majority of my lifetime is that there would be 1 or 2 times a year that I'd go see a movie in a theater and go, that was awesome. Like, that was absolutely freaking phenomenal. And that experience has been fewer and further between in the last several years in particular. And again, there's a lot of reasons for it, but to me, this is the primary driver behind why the quality is diluted. Is we're seeing studios put out so much content that like the quality can't keep up.
Mm-hmm.
So looking forward to the trend changing, but there you go. Thanks for humoring me on that thread there.
Any day.
Yeah.
Anytime, any day.
All right. Let's transition straight out of that into another classic. JP and the Beans top 5, because we know that's what keeps you coming back.
Absolutely.
Dear loyal listener. So on the topic of TV shows, we wanted to hit our top 5 favorite TV shows of all time. So not necessarily in the superhero genre, but just extensively, holistically, what is it that we have loved on the TV show side? So our top 5 favorites. Riley, you go first.
Okay, number 5. We're getting right into it. Okay.
Number
5, because
Yep.
if you don't have this on your top 5, I don't know what you're doing with your
You're
life.
sad.
I have The Office at number 5.
Mhm.
Okay, now look.
Mhm.
I love The Office.
Mhm.
I have been unable to rewatch it because of a couple of things, okay? Don't get me wrong. It's one of the very few shows where I have laughed through every episode.
Yep.
Every episode made me laugh. It's part of me is like, it's too cringy at some points. Okay? Michael Scott is a cringe fest. Okay? And sometimes I can't do it. And there's like a 4 episode span in like season 3 or season 4 where I'm like, I can't do it.
Yep.
I can't do it. Now, I'm sure I could eventually do it. And someday I will. And it'll probably be with a wife. So it won't be in the next 20 years. But anyways, besides the point. You have to have The Office on here out of respect. It is an absolute classic. 10 out of 10.
Love that.
I have The Office at number 5.
I love that. For me, my number 5 is Modern Family. In general, a lot of comedies for me are going to show up on this list.
Same.
Yeah, and I think that just kind of lends itself to the TV show format, let's call it. Another one of those shows, I like what you said a lot about The Office, where you've laughed through every episode. That's what Modern Family has been for me. And part of what I really enjoy about it, though, aside from the humor, is that in each episode, particularly in the first several seasons, like it ends up going on like many TV shows do. It lasts or is allowed to live longer than it should have. Like I think it went to like season 11 or something in that ballpark. It's like it really should have been tied off like by season 8 or 9. But I appreciated that that it made an effort to not just like tear characters down for the expense of humor or at the expense of humor, but it also tried to send a positive message.
Absolutely.
Right. And that was really worthwhile. I found that refreshing. My number 4 is a bit of a throwback here. Band of Brothers. So this would have come out in the early, it was either early 2000s or late 90s. I should have looked that up. But on HBO, based off of it's a very close adaptation of the book of the same name, which tells the story of the 101st Airborne Division in World War II, starting with their training, and then they land or parachute into Normandy during D-Day. Just a phenomenal retelling of a critical time in history, and in particular through the lens of some what I would call pretty exceptional dudes, it's safe to say. So Band of Brothers, my number 4.
my number 4, it made me like Star Wars more. I've got The Mandalorian at number 4. I think this was the breath of fresh air that Star Wars needed. I think Star Wars is getting stale. I think 7, 8, 9 proves that.
Yep. Did you remember that The Mandalorian, by the way, was the first piece of original content that Disney Plus dropped on that platform?
And what a start.
Wow. I didn't remember that until I was doing research for the pod.
What a start.
Yeah.
It was well worthwhile being the first.
No joke.
Because if people at that time were like, this is what they're going to put out.
Correct.
Oh my gosh, we're in for a treat. Okay, but I'd say it's still pretty consistent.
Yes.
With its production, and so I got The Mandalorian at number 4.
It's a great number 4.
Now at number 3, I have this is my other serious show, and then the rest are comedies. I have Game of Thrones.
There you go.
Okay,
yeah.
Because it's one of the very few shows where when things were happening, well, first of all, you're very invested in the characters. Yep. You're like, oh, you're rooting for some guy, or you want somebody to die. Oddly enough, now that I'm thinking about it, now that I've gotten really into WWE, very similar vibes. Okay, because WWE, you have these characters that you're just absolutely rooting for, and when you get the heel turn, right, or somebody in this case in Game of Thrones just dies, you're like, no, why? And so I remember one of the season finales in my sophomore year of college. I had all my friends over that watched it, and we were all like at the edge of our seats for the final like episode for the finale, and it was fantastic. So at number 3, I have to give it to Game of Thrones, even though the ending was shit. But that's a story for another day.
At least everybody's unified on that, though.
Yes.
Right? Like, I haven't encountered a single person that has watched that show that said, the ending was great, or at least I'm okay with it. No, everybody has said, terrible.
The worst thing to happen in Game of Thrones was having George R.R. Martin walk off and not be a writer anymore.
Yep.
That's what hurt it the most.
Yep. Pretty tough to overcome. Well, my number 3 is The Office. Just an absolute gem. And I'm really curious. I wonder at what point something broke in me where I am no longer bothered at all by the cringiness of so many of those scenes. I just find them so much more funny. Like Scott's Tots, that episode.
I couldn't sit through it.
It's just incredible. It's so good. And I die every time I watch it. But I totally understand when someone's going, I just can't do it, because of the cringe is just elite. Absolutely elite. But that show, again, another show that unfortunately outlived its usefulness. After Michael Scott leaves, it's just a totally different ballgame. And listen, it's not even bad. It's not The Office without Michael Scott. It's just not. But
they should have ended. It should have ended with Mike.
It should have. So in my mind, that's where I choose to just go, done, shun, unshun. The Office. That's my number 3. My number 2 is Friends. Absolutely incredible. Again, another one of those shows that, well, I will say with the exception of season 1, they were clearly trying to figure out what the heck they were doing.
That's fair.
And what the heck they had. But by the time they hit their groove sometime in season 2, and it started probably after Ross got rid of the monkey, because what the hell are we doing? No character in New York needs a monkey as a pet. It just went gangbusters from there. Infinitely quotable. I will watch that show over and over again for the rest of my life. I will quote it for the rest of my life, and I will be a better man for it.
Well, and it's one of those rare sitcoms too, where it's like you can just watch an episode randomly, and it doesn't matter. Like, yes, there's overall arching stories throughout it, but at the same time, you're like, you get the gist.
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah, no question. So there you go. That's my number 2.
Okay,
Friends.
So these next 2 are 1 and 2 because of how often I watch clips of these 2 shows. Perfect. Number 2, I have New Girl. New Girl is an absolute banger, dude. Yep. I love that show. At first, you kind of go in, especially as like a dude, you're like, this seems like this might
like a trap.
This seems like it might be a girl show, but I'm still gonna give it a shot. Yep. And it was fantastic. I was so happy to be wrong.
It's for both.
Oh
it's
my
for
God.
both genders. It's great.
Yeah, it genuinely
appeals to both.
And it's right up there with Friends. in the sense of quotability, and you can kind of just throw an episode on, and it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah, I got New Girl at 2.
Yep. That's fantastic.
So,
all right, what's your number 1, friend?
My number 1, this will not surprise you at all. I have Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yep.
It is Andy Samberg. That is my boy. Honest to God, hilarious. They just did such a fantastic job on that show. Andre Braugher, I don't think he won an Emmy.
Wow, really?
Period. I don't think he did.
That's criminal.
And it is criminal. It's right up there with, did Michael Scott did Steve Carell win one for Michael? I don't think
don't know.
I don't know if he did either.
Jeez.
So it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't know how you didn't win an award.
We're even handing these awards out for if that's the case.
Right. So again, double check me, because either way, he should have at least walked away with 3 of them.
Oh my gosh.
He should have at least had.
Nope, Steve Carell did not.
Steve Carell did not win
That's
an Emmy.
garbage.
And check me on Andre Braugher.
Yep.
That's the other one I want to know. So, just to put you into perspective of these award shows, I do not know how Michael Scott, as iconic as he is, did not win an Emmy. That mind-boggling to me.
No, didn't win one for
Andre Braugher did not either.
Unbelievable.
So,
what are we doing?
Goes to show you exactly what I'm saying. So, those 2 alone carried that show. Fantastic. And oh my God, I love it. So that's my number 1.
Those are great polls.
Yeah.
Great polls. For me, my number 1 is Breaking Bad.
That was my call.
Yeah. You knew. It is, and I don't know what will ever unseat it in my mind. It's kind of in this place of just this sacred place at this point. It is the best, most well-crafted story I think I've watched in terms of character development from start to finish. And it's hard to even compare that to movies because it just is allowed to be a slow burn, but it's also, in my opinion, perfect in that it only goes for 5 seasons, right? So they don't let themselves hang out for too long. Now there's since been a spin-off or 2, but that's great. Let the spin-offs live in their own world. They didn't make that mistake of trying to stretch the show proper from what it was. But the absolute masterfulness of every character in this show is so different by the time their respective storylines conclude. Not all of them make it to the end, but even those that do have changed so dramatically. Now, it's a tragedy. It doesn't end in oh, that's really nice, how happy. It's a sad story, but it is as worthwhile and as highly as I can possibly recommend a TV show to anybody. So for me, Breaking Bad, numero uno.
Well, it's nice that not every show ends with a happy ending.
Right.
It's not real life, unfortunately.
Right. It's part of what I remember watching it for the first time in particular that was so fascinating is you go from rooting for the primary protagonist, Walter White, to legitimately rooting against him in the last, 20, 25% of the show. And you just want the other characters to overcome him.
Right.
It's wild. And I've never had that experience. And don't expect to again. But it was just an incredible, incredible series of television. So Breaking Bad, number 1.
There you go.
There you go. Riles. I think that's it.
That is it.
We've done it again.
We have done it again. Knocked it out of the ballpark. 10 out of 10.
We're just here for the volume. We don't really care about the quality. We're just here to keep pushing it right at you.
Absolutely. That's what we're here to do. We're going to be in the next streaming service. Anyways. Yes. So if you like that, follow us on all the stuff. I really don't.
All the social medias.
I don't care to do the spiel.
Nope.
So
don't do it.
On that note, Godspeed.
Peace.